Great. So I think Steve will start off here.
Yep. Thank you, Daniel. My name's Steve Quasha, and I am the owner and creator of Akibono Press, and like to feature this book that Daniel and I wrote, Think Big for Business. There are two books, book one and book two, and just give you a background of why we decided to write this book series. I've been teaching at a women's university for about 25 years. I've been full-time for a number of years at Sugiyama Jogaku and Daigaku. It's in Nagoya. And one thing that I noticed with my female students, most of the textbooks that are available um, offered a general overview of business. And for female students, a lot of them are geared towards kind of guiding them into the secretarial pool. Office workers, office ladies, those types of jobs. And I felt there were very few role models for young women to follow that could lead them more towards a career where they started their own business or went into the management track. So I had this idea quite a few years ago, and then slowly it developed, met Daniel, and we decided to make this textbook series. So as I mentioned, female university graduates, they're often ushered into less challenging positions at companies after they get hired. Most of the students, at least from my experience, they tend to work for a few years until they get married. But recent statistics show that women are marrying later in life, and a growing number of them are not marrying at all. So until now, as I said, there's just hasn't been a lot of material out there for female entrepreneurship at the university level. So Dan and I decided to, first propose doing this as a research project to kind of see if we could change that mindset and to teach young women that starting and owning a business is a more ideal way to create financial independence and a higher quality of life. So we wanted to create materials that would teach them about, getting on a track where they'll learn about investment and different career paths that would help them. Daniel?
Yeah. So as Steve said, there are two books in our series, and we centered the books on several characters. So the main character in the book, we wanted a strong woman character. So we have Mirai Takahashi, and she's a 25-year-old entrepreneur from Kyoto, Japan. She's graduated university. She's very interested in starting a business, and she finds a mentor in Catherine Ramirez. And she's an experienced business owner, and she's starting to mentor Mirai on the basics of starting a business and then operating that business. And then finally, we have the character of Paulo Silva, who is an assistant to Catherine, and he kind of helps along the way, sort of a near peer for Mirai. He knows a little bit more than her and kind of can guide her, but not as much as Catherine. So, as Steve said, while this book is for everybody, I mainly teach men at my university. We wanted to create kind of a woman character as the main character, but not really hit people over the head with this. With too much of that, it's just sort of in the background, and we wanted to show students, that women can be in more powerful positions. So throughout the book, you will see that in every one of the conversations, the person with the specialized knowledge or with the higher position is a female. But as I said, it's not directly pointed out in the book. So each unit of the textbook, there's 6 units for each textbook, and we have a number of different themes. So things like planning the future that looks at market research, job skills, managing the product cycle, motivation and productivity, socializing in business, and finance 101. Just to show a little bit of a contrast of the units. For example, Finance 101 in the first book is about personal finance. So Mirai starts to earn some money, and she needs to learn how to manage her own money. Whereas in the second book, we look at corporate finance. How do you make decisions for your company in order to invest? And then we have a structure for each unit, which starts with the Startup Academy, which introduces the topic of that unit. Then an introduction where we go over vocabulary. And then there is a section for each of the four skills. So reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Um, Alternating, each unit has either a language use, which is more of a grammar or word knowledge, or a critical thinking, where they look more in depth at whatever they're studying in that unit. Then there's an information gap uh, activity, which Steve is really into the information gaps, and I've kind of learned after using them in my class how useful they can be. And then finally, in each unit, there's a skill up, which is teaching an essential business or life skill. So things like writing emails or time management or goal setting. In addition to the main units, there are two projects for each textbook, so four projects total. Um, the projects are in the first book an elevator pitch, and then a pitch deck to pitch a product or service. And then in the second book, they kind of build on that, making a social media campaign. And then finally, a second pitch deck where they're trying to get additional funding from investors. At the end of every 3 units, there's a unit review, which I think is really helpful in the book, so that before they jump into the projects, they can understand what the material they've learned. And then finally, we have a grammar focus, which is at the end of the textbook, that goes over specific grammar points. We thought that was something good to add, because a lot of teachers are interested in it, but it is separate from the main unit, so it could be skipped if that's not the focus of your classes. And then finally, one of the things that we wanted to do is to integrate 21st century skills into the textbook. So learning skills like critical thinking, life skills like socializing, especially for business settings, and then finally literacy skills. There's all sorts of literacy, especially like technology literacy, that we wanted to focus on so that they could use technology in their classes, but then also maybe in the future in business. And while it wasn't a big thing when we wrote it, of course, AI is going to, we may need to eventually do a little bit of an update to the teacher's book to integrate some more AI into those units. So I think what we're going to do here is just give you an example of a couple of activities. We did this a presentation like this in one place where we had a breakout room and we had people working on it. But for today, we're just going to kind of give you an overview of 2 of the units that we think is interesting to us. So Steve and I actually met at PanSig. We were talking about this earlier, and we bonded over the fact that we are both real estate investors. And we've kind of actually done several projects together in the United States, purchasing different types of property and working together. And we talk quite often about our investment. So one of the things that we found really interesting in the textbook was that unit on personal finance and corporate finance. So one of the activities that we have is a real estate investment. And basically, students are analyzing the pros and cons of 2 investment properties. One of them is a rural fixer-upper. It's a farmhouse that could be used as a short-term rental, and the other is a city condo, which is much easier to manage as a long-term rental and much more secure return, but a lower return. And just basically on their instincts, we kind of work on what they see as the pros and cons of these 2 investments. And we're trying to get them into that sort of mindset of thinking about things that maybe they haven't thought about before. For some of my more advanced students in my economics classes, they've enjoyed this so much that we've actually learned how to quantitatively analyze properties as well. And we've done that as separate activities for US properties and Japanese properties. So you can see how you can build on it depending on the teacher's knowledge of the subject and also the student's interest. I think this one's for you, Steve.
Thank you. I just wanted, could you go back to the
Yeah,
previous
sure.
slide? Sorry. I personally, I teach this class and use the first book, and I've been doing it using it for a number of years. And it's very interesting because my students are mostly from Nagoya, which is a city, so there tends to be a bias towards investing in the condominium. And that's what they know, and that's what's easy for them. But I think, Daniel, when we first piloted this, it actually was a very close investment. There wasn't too much of a financial difference. But then there was so much bias. I came back and I remember we discussed this, that so many students, 95% chose the condominium, that we decided to make it much more um, lucrative if you just stuck with the farmhouse and rented it out as a short-term rental through Airbnb or VRBO or whatever it may be in Japan.
Hmm.
So it was interesting to see that if the students would change their mindset and the way of thinking. And my own personal experience is anecdotal, is that, still we're at 65 or 70% choose the condominium, but at least some are thinking a little bit outside the box and going, wait a second. How do we analyze? They're asking the teacher, they ask me, well, how do we know what the numbers are? Okay, let's take a look. We'll do it on the board. And through my experience, as a real estate investor, and also Dan and I bouncing numbers off each other, I can easily show them on the board. And the teacher's manual, I believe we have some information in there that shows, okay, this is how you'd analyze it. It's simple. Show your students how to analyze the property. Let's look at your income and expenses. What is the potential income? And let's look at taxes and other things. So
Yeah.
it has, students have said to me later that they actually really enjoyed this, analyzing that. It got them thinking and using their
Yeah.
degree. They're business management majors, so they feel like they're applying their degree. So I thought that was really great. Sorry, we'll go to
Uh,
the next slide.
no, I
Oh,
was going to
beautiful.
say
Yeah.
also, I noticed with my students that there's been a change over the couple of years too, because there's so much information on the FIRE community, financial independence, retire early, and real estate investing that not only are they more interested, but they're more astute. So many of my students have been bringing up things about Minpaku laws
Right.
and the difficulty of getting licenses during this conversation, and also alternative incomes they can get from the
Mm.
vegetable garden or from tax breaks they get from using this for an investment for tourists. So I've really seen a development in my students in their ability to analyze these sort
Yeah.
of deals. Um,
Yeah.
but
And I think 2% of GDP of Japan now is coming from inbound tourism.
yeah,
So it's adding up to a lot of money, and people are looking for new experiences outside of, the main cities. So some type of farm stay would have appeal for a fair amount of tourists, I feel.
yeah.
But I'm not going out to buy the country house just yet. Let's move on. Okay, so investment decision. This is in, I believe, Unit 6, and we wanted, as Daniel mentioned earlier, teach students about personal finance. And, we break it down into some basics and teach them what an ETF is, an exchange traded fund, and why they should have a diversified portfolio. The second one, create a diversified portfolio based on a financial planner's recommendations. That's all part of the first activity of the first two parts of the unit, where Mirai sits down with her financial planner, and that person gives them advice about which investments that she might want to consider. So it gets students thinking that, the teacher's able to push, throw it back to students, say, so if you're going to invest your money, what would you invest in? Would you put it in the bank? Why would you do that, or why not? What would the return be? And, a lot of my students don't know very much about that. So it's a great opportunity for me to teach that and teach the basics. So I think this unit is really empowering for young people, not just women, but of course for men, all young people in Japan. And you can introduce them to, at that point, NISA, which they've probably seen in the news or seen advertisements for NISA, Japan's individual retirement accounts, which is based on the British system, and also IDECO, which they can invest in if they join a company. So then learn about the power of compound interest. You can easily show them, if they're earning, let's say, 5% or 7% per year after so many years, what that's going to be. There are many online investment calculators that I use for business English class with this textbook, and I also use it in my seminar to show my students about compound interest. And then more advanced students learn how to calculate return and risk. We have them look at that and explain, if they're going to invest in emerging markets fund, that the risk can be higher. If they're only going to invest in one country, we have them think about, well, okay, if you only invest in the Japanese stock market, is there a risk to that? Or only in the United States, S&P 500, which has done great over the last 10 years, but what's the risk going forward. Just have students start thinking about this, uh, and keep it basic. I think if you don't want it to be complicated, but Daniel made an excellent graph that's on this page that simply shows them that after a certain amount of time, if you just stay in the market and continue investing, at the age of 60 or 65, you'll be a millionaire. If you invest, a fair amount of your monthly, not a fair amount, it's, 30,000 yen or 40,000 yen or your monthly salary, that after 30 or 35 years, you're going to accumulate a lot of money in your investment account. So I think that, to me, just looking at my students' faces when they realize and they figure out on their own and they look at the graph and they figure it out, you just see the aha moment and they go, wow, I never thought of that. So yeah, you can get rich slowly. Don't try to get rich quickly. Don't take on too much risk. You take a little risk, take on a little risk, but you can get rich slowly. And yeah, so it's very good. Sir?
Oh, sorry, I turned it over to you on this conclusion
Oh,
here. That's
okay.
I was hoping you were going to tell a little bit about some of our
Yeah.
additional materials and the
Okay.
YouTube channel.
Sure. Great. Thank you. So, along with the two textbooks, what Daniel and I have created, each unit, as Daniel mentioned, has specific segments, parts of it. One of the segments that we have is a shadowing activity for the vocabulary. So a speaker will read a sentence using the vocabulary two times. One will be a slow pace, and the next one will be more of uh, let's say, a regular reading speed. And I think my students really like it. It's like karaoke style lettering, and they're challenged by it when they do it native level speed. It's a lot of fun. So we have the shadowing activities. Um, Anyone looking to adopt the book, we have the teacher's manual. That's free. It's a PDF. We could send that to you. And we did choose to use a third party, a person who uses the textbook. They showed an interest. They wanted to write the teacher's manual. We thought that would be better because uh, we wanted to make sure it was really simple, and we worked with that person to edit it, Sam Keith, and he did a really great job. So happy with the teacher's manual. And then for the audio, that's just a QR code at the back of the book. That's free. Of course, you could just download that. And we can offer quizzes. I use Google Classroom, so I give 2 quizzes per semester. So I'd be willing, of course, to share those with anybody interested, the quizzes for assessment. And we also created a YouTube channel for supplemental material for students as well, that I tried to show
We're
you
gonna show
that.
in a second. One thing before
Oh,
we do
sorry.
that, I
Yeah, go
was
ahead.
gonna add, we also have Quizlet, right? That's
Correct. Sorry. Forgot about
the
that.
Quizlet's all already in there. So it's integrated with Quizlet. I know Steve uses that a lot. I actually don't use the Quizlet portion as
Okay.
much. But let's just finish up here and then I'll let you go over to the YouTube. But this
Okay.
is just basically our contact information. I'm at Ritsumeikan University. Steve, as he said, is at Sugiyama Jogakuen Daigaku. And these are our email addresses. I'm sure take a screenshot or you can find that somewhere else. And then I'll stop sharing. So I'll let Steve show you what we did with the YouTube channel.
Okay.
That's a supplement for the textbook.
Okay. One thing I should mention about Quizlet. So for those of you not familiar with Quizlet, it's an app. It's free. All my students, I have them download it, and it's has a variety of vocabulary games. So what I like to use is the simplest one is just a flashcard system, and students can look at the flashcard. It has both English and Japanese, so they can quickly study and review the flashcards. And there's a bunch of matching games and other games on there. And because I pay for the teacher's um, version, I can see actually how many games my students have used. So I know if they're engaging or not. So I
Do
could
you use that as part of your grading, Steve?
yeah, I do. I do.
Okay.
It's only 5%, but I do it.
Okay.
I explain to them and then I show them after in week 2 or 3, I said, okay, I'm gonna pull this up. So, hey, look at so and so. They've really used the site, but you other people haven't used the vocabulary site. And then they go, oh, he can check. And so, yes, they realize I could check. So I want them to use it and to review the vocabulary. And Most of them do by the end of the semester. So let me just take you through the YouTube channel. These are just thumbnails of YouTubes that, let me start at the bottom, what Daniel and I created for the textbook. So as you can see, there's shadowing activities for each unit. And again, these links are all with QR codes in the back of the textbook. So they have shadowing activities. I suppose I could click on this, it might show. Oh no, it's a good.
You can click on the link there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unit 6, Shadowing Practice. Read the sentences as the words appear across the screen. Number 1. The money you earn is income. Let's try a little faster speed. The money you earn is income.
So I think just looking at it, you get the idea of how the shadowing works. So the speaker says it. So we alternate between a female voice and a male voice for the shadowing activity. So the shadowings are all there. As Daniel mentioned, the elevator pitch is there. The projects are here too. So if the students, you could send them the link so they could watch it again and again. And I find that I give them the link for the elevator pitch because it's really, this is a great activity. And Daniel, you created this. It's wonderful because students aren't familiar with the term what an elevator pitch is. You explain the concept, how this is very common in the IT, the tech world. And then at first they'll write it out, but they can't get it down to a certain amount of time. And then you have them practice again and again, and then they have to scale it down to a 1-minute elevator pitch. And it's a challenge. And then they do it a couple times and they develop confidence. You could see they're talking about their company's product. It's really empowering. It's great.
And all of these activities build on each other. So in the elevator pitch, they come up with the concept of their company. And then in project 1, they build a pitch deck for it. Project 2, they build the social media marketing. So it sort of adds to each time.
Yeah. So I think that's a great activity. I think it's really good for the students. And then we put content in here that who are tomorrow's futures customers. This was a link in Unit 1. And then we developed also a handout that goes with this that students can do a vocabulary matching. Before they watch the video, they do the vocabulary matching. I assign this as homework and they come into class and then we watch the video again. And then they have to talk about some of the vocabulary that they learned. 5 best countries to start a company. Digital healthcare is one unit, I believe Unit 3. Other ones that I thought were really great and useful, students are quite interested in Starbucks success. So I just show them Starbucks and I have them work in groups and say, so why is Starbucks successful? And each group has to give their answers why they're successful and then say, okay, see what's the same, your idea is the same what's featured in the video and what's different. And they have to take notes. And they told me later on in feedback when I asked that for the class, they liked learning about Starbucks. The next one is our most popular video by far, How the Rich Stay Rich. And it's probably because the headline and people in YouTube land out there really want to know about that. And again, my students were quite interested in this. They were curious how rich people stay rich and or how to become rich. And they've asked me questions. How to use ChatGPT to grow your business. That actually was a fun one. This was an interesting video too, passive income guide, because a lot of my students, they're just trying to find a job. They don't understand what passive income really is. And we talk about, I introduced them to income streams. That's kind of an extension from Unit 6 on financial independence. So I've actually, again, I've used this in business English and in my seminar class. It's been great. Productivity is another good one, how to boost your productivity. This was actually a great unit. It's part of the textbook. 3 game changers. I think Daniel did the voiceover for that one. Also a great video to introduce the students because you introduce the vocabulary term in the unit. What is a game changer? What is a game-changing product? Yes, the iPhone. Good. What else would be a game-changing product? And you have the students speculate and guess what they feel is a game-changing product, and then watch the video and see if it's any different than what their answers were. And maybe you could extend that. I've done it where, what do you think will be a game-changing product in the next 5 or 10 years? So it's quite interesting. Time management, very useful skill for their personal life and their working life as well. And yeah, I think those were some of our most popular videos. So again, I think for teachers using the book, we have all the supplemental material. That one of my biggest pet peeves as an educator in Japan is, how do we get them to study outside of class? You know, just 10, 15 minutes, review the vocabulary, or just watch English, or, you know, read the subtitles on the screen. Do something to see that language again and engage with it and answer a question, come back, or they have to answer a question for the next class. And I think that's the way we set up the book. And I've seen it personally that the students get a lot out of it. And I think we're teaching them life skills and how to be successful. So I think when we embarked on this journey, I thought, wow, I just want to give something to students that I think they'd be able to walk away from their university life saying, I really learned something that's going to help me.
Yeah, Steve, I actually wanted to add something I haven't said to you yet, but I actually had my first student come to me that's actually used the idea of the pitch deck, and he's putting together a company. They're trying to create an app, and he's really creating the app. And he put together a pitch deck, and last week he said, you know, can you watch my actual pitch deck for the company? And we're going to look to start launching it this year. So
Wow.
that's, I think, the first person I've seen that's fully carried through on something and is
great.
actually using it. They're using the Ritz Macon. We have a business incubator, so he's also doing it through that and everything. So it's kind of I really think students are developing as well as.
I think it'd be a great idea if we could ever share those to use in our class.
Yeah,
Like they
yeah.
could see the near pair model and say, oh, by the way, if you're looking for near pair, you know, someone who's done this, watch this video. And say,
Yeah.
oh, that's what we're supposed to produce. I get it. Yeah, because it's a new concept. Wow, that's great to hear. Yeah. Well, John, can we continue on with the list of questions? Is that okay? And maybe we could help the viewers and people interested to discuss how, you know, we went through this whole process creating materials, and maybe it will inspire some other people to do the same.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I've got a couple questions about the textbook itself before we get to the creative process, if you don't mind. What's the level that this textbook is geared towards in terms of like a Cepher level or a TOEIC level?
Yeah, I think we left it as a Cepher, possibly A2, but more like a B1 and then B2. Yeah, so it's in that area. You know, if I had to say, it's more like a Cepher B1. My students generally are lower TOEIC score, where students will take my business English class second year, and I'd say their average TOEIC score is probably about 460 to 500. They're not that high, but so it's a little, for my students, it's a little difficult for them. I think the accurate TOEIC level would be 520 to 600. But
Okay.
but there's enough scaffolding in there where I use it in my class, and one of my questions from my exit survey is, did you feel the textbook material is too difficult? And they don't say that, because all the audio tracks, everything is it's listed in the back of the book as well. So if they have trouble, you could read the audio.
They
They
can
could
skip
read
to
the
the
audio.
back and see.
They could see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they could see it. Yeah. So, no, it's fine. Yeah.
Right.
So I
Yeah,
think
I think
that's the
that's
level
one
we're
of the
going for. Yeah.
best things, is that you can kind of scaffold up and down. I unfortunately don't have any classes where I teach where I can use the textbook by itself, though it's an option in our university for workshop classes. It's just that I don't teach workshops. And but I do use it as a supplementary text in my university, and we have different levels, but I think our highest levels are a little bit higher than Steve. I mean, we have kind of upper level students. There's a lot of returnees or something like that, and even they can get a lot out of the textbook. We kind of wanted to create it so that even the teacher could learn about business, right? So it's not just an English textbook. It's a business textbook where you can learn about how to do social media marketing, how to create a product, but then the English is in there, you know. So
Right.
that was kind of
It's
our
like
idea.
it might be like business for dummies. You know,
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, that's
Business
true.
by dummies, because we wrote it.
Get get control of your finances. Use this textbook. No,
Yeah.
I can't really say that, but I do think, John, I think our target market, people who want to use it, would be business majors, business management, economics, but I do think engineering students could use it as well. I think they get a lot out of it. I mean, if engineers want to think about starting their own business, and I highly encourage, I mean, Japan has so many engineers, and not in my opinion, not enough go and start their own companies.
Right,
So
right. They're
if you
just in
wanted to get on that track, use this book.
I think even humanities and arts majors
Yeah,
could benefit
yeah.
from it. Like, I have a friend who went back to university and did an arts major. He was like 50 when he did it. And he was one thing that he thought was incredible about it was they had a lot of business courses of how to turn your art into a business. And he actually started a Baron company, which are these things that are used for woodblock prints to push down things. And he did it as a project in his class, but he was a businessman, so he kind of knew what to do, but he took those lessons. And so I think the same thing. If you got students that want to be novelists or manga artists or anything, this will give them the basic business skills.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you like you were saying, it teaches some financial literacy. It's some basic life skills that as young people they should be aware of these things, and maybe they don't get they're not exposed to it. And I think it's fantastic way to get them to think about their future and start investing when they're young because they're all 20s, and that probably change their lives,
Yeah.
which is great because a lot of times students will think about a textbook and it's just a textbook, and when they're done, they throw it out. But it seems like a lot of the information in these books are actual real life world skills and information that could be useful for changing their lives.
Mm.
I feel that's very true. And also I think, Daniel, you wrote the part about the priority system.
Yeah, the time management system.
Yeah,
I actually took it from Brian Tracy.
Okay.
Was one of his systems, which is how to prioritize tasks. But I think it's
Yeah,
really
it
useful.
it was a really so John, I had never heard of that system. I obviously have my own time management system. But so Daniel wrote this unit and I asked him, where'd you get it? He goes, oh, I took it, from this and then I changed it around a little bit.
Okay, is that I'm not familiar with it either. I know that there's Eisenhower four quadrants, like urgent, not urgent, important, not important, that kind of.
It's similar to that. I was just seeing if I could pull it up real quick, but basically what the system is that you prioritize tasks, and whether it's things that are urgent or whether there's I'm sorry, things that you could delegate to somebody else or whatever after making a list. And yeah, I think a lot of people, including the teachers that have used it, have said, "Wow, this is a great system." Um,
Right.
for me as well. Let's see if I can just find it real quick. It's
Yeah. I found I looked at it and then I started using it and I thought, this is really helpful in my life. So
yeah.
that was the benefit that I got out of it. And my students, some of them had their own system, but a lot of them didn't. Something came up and they're just too busy and they couldn't really organize their life. And uh, it was helpful, I think, for them. And I do think the difference, you asked about the level of books. I feel that book 2 has more difficult content. So I do feel that it's a higher level, especially the unit on
Mhm.
digital marketing, and it talks about, um, how to do advertisements on YouTube, things like that. Looking at pay-per-click, those techniques, it's a little bit challenging.
How do you evaluate your students using this book in terms of like English language acquisition, or business
Yeah.
acumen? How do you
Right.
evaluate your students as far as a university class goes?
I do it, as I mentioned, Quizlet's a small part, it's 5%, so that's more participation. I use assessment for the two quizzes, so, are they studying the vocabulary? And then I base it on observation of their presentation of their projects. The two projects that are in the book, I look at that, and I'm looking at the quality of their elevator pitch, and project number two, their idea for a company, and how they're able to extend that, and are they using the vocabulary that we learned and the terms to apply that. So it's productive skills.
Is there a rubric or something that teachers can use to like evaluate the elevator pitch, for example?
No, but that's a great idea and it's something we could do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could work on that. Yeah. Or it's something
Yeah.
that collectively, people that are using the book, we have a Facebook page. We could ask people if they want to contribute, say, we could put a template out there and say, how do you guys feel about this? So yeah,
Mm.
it's a great idea though. Yeah, sure.
Well, it is a business book, and a lot of people don't know much about business. I don't know much about business. And if you said, you should invest in an ETF, like, what does that stand for? I mean, as
Right.
a teacher, they might not know what an ETF is or how that's different from a mutual fund or so. How is a layman who doesn't know much about business or finance teach this book?
Right.
I think most of the main concepts are covered in the teacher's manual. So we looked at, that's one of the reasons, as Steve said, that we didn't want to make the teacher's manual ourselves, because after you've worked on a book for a year or 2 years, you start to feel things are normal or natural that other people might not see. So I think one of our big concepts, first of all, my wife being Japanese, it was good to run all the activities by her to see how an English learner would approach it. But then we also had a coworker of Steve that made the teacher's manuals after teaching the course. And so all the questions and issues he had, he included in the teacher's manual, and we tried to fix it. So it may not be perfect, but that's kind of
Yeah.
how we dealt with that.
And I guess, John, a concise answer would be if you invest in one stock, uh, it's great if the stock goes up, but if they have a scandal or a recall, something happens to that stock, you could lose all your money, and therefore the risk is quite high. But if you had an opportunity to buy a big basket of stocks, 200, 300, 1,000 stocks, that's what's called an exchange traded fund, which mutual funds were popular that did that, 30, 40 years ago. Exchange traded funds, these ETFs came along and they became quite popular because they had this, you could buy a large basket of stocks at a very low commission. So for the average investor, the mutual funds were charging much more money in commission, 1%, 2%. An ETF, for, let's say, Vanguard is the company that began this ETF boom, they only will charge, 0.08% or 0.2%. It's very low. So basically the commissions aren't eroding your profits. So over time, you could just have a big basket of funds, and let's say the top 500 companies in the United States stock market, the S&P 500 or the Nikkei 225, and you could buy this ETF, and just the idea is that you would just buy and hold it. And that over time, an ETF like the S&P 500 has a history of 10% per year, historically for 100 years. That's what you back test the data, that's what it shows. And the Nikkei itself is not as high, but you want to balance out your portfolio with a lot of these ETFs. You don't want to just have the United States. You want to have, let's say, Japan. You could have a all world ETF and get the students thinking about that and say, all right, so you want to have a balance. And the analogy that I use is, do you like hamburger? And most of my students say, yes, I like hamburger. I like hamburger. I said, so if you ate hamburger, only hamburger, every day, what happens? They say, oh, you'd get sick. I said, right. So what do you eat with a hamburger? And they say, rice. I said, great. What else? Salad. Wonderful. What about a drink? Yeah, I want a drink. Okay. So you want to have a balanced meal. So why don't you look at ETFs as you want to eat a balanced meal? It's like if you only buy the US-based ETFs, you're just eating hamburger. So you want to have salad and maybe,
Right.
a good Japanese balanced meal will have many colors, right? As we know. So you have a nice
Yeah.
healthy diet.
Yeah.
So that's the analogy that I like to use with students. I hope I
Okay.
explained that. I hope you
I have just
understood my
one
explanation.
more question specifically about the book, and then
Yeah.
if anyone in the audience does have a question, you can put it in the chat, or if you want to turn on your mic, you're welcome to do that. And then after this one particular question I have about numbers, seems like a lot of Japanese students have difficulty with numbers, or actually any language learner when they're speaking in a foreign language. Numbers seem to be giving them a lot of difficulty, even simple numbers like 12 and 20, or when you get up to the larger numbers like millions or hundreds of thousands. How do you deal with numbers in this book? Do you have any?
We actually have we actually have a language. So as I said, we have the critical thinking and then the language use. And one of the things that we introduce early is the language use of understanding of numbers and, for example, where the commas are and the hundreds place, the thousands place. So we deal with that sort of very early, but that's 100% right. I mean, of course, anybody who's taught Japanese students, they really struggle with these numbers, and I think vice versa, right? We sometimes, it's easier for me to say yen in Japanese than it is to say the English equivalent of those yen, because you think in a different system, right?
Right.
But then the other thing that we do teach as part of that language use is when, like, I've sometimes had students present some data and they say 23,256,000 or something, and I'll say, you could just say around 23 million, right? So we do deal with that as well, of when to use those kind of rounding. But that's the main thing, I think, and then using them quite a lot because numbers come out throughout the book. So students get a lot of practice of it. I
Right,
don't know
right.
if there's
Yeah, I'd
anything to
imagine
add.
so.
Yeah.
I think it's just repetition. And if a teacher had a class where the students were struggling with 10,000, 100,000, a million, um, I have a supplemental activity I'd be glad to share with people. And it's just I'm big on the information gap. So basically, you're reading something to your partner and your partner has to write down what they hear.
Hmm.
Yeah, that works really
Yeah.
well, and
Yeah.
it's
So
easy, simple,
those
kind of
do
fun
work really
too.
well. Yeah.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. And again, if anyone does have a question, you can pop it in the chat. Otherwise, I'll ask a bunch of questions. And I've got a list. All right. So the first one is when you're working on material like a textbook, what would be your typical writing or development day? How does that work out for you guys? And when do you have time to do it?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start and I'll let Steve go, but um, you got to keep in mind that we started writing this book during COVID. It was
Right at the start. Yep.
Yeah, right at the start of COVID, we had the idea. We didn't, of course, know what was going to go on. And for us, what ended up happening is I know we had some Zoom meetings and we threw things back and forth, and it was very difficult at first to come up with the concept. And in the end, we decided I went up to Steve's house. He's in Mie, I'm in
I'm in
Shiga.
Gifu. I'm in Gifu.
Oh, Gifu, I'm sorry, not Mie. Yeah, he's in Gifu. And I went up and we really nailed down the structure of the book. So we got, of course, we already had kind of the outline of what units we wanted to cover, but once we created that structure of each unit, that was sort of the tipping point because then we could separate, and each of us had our own units that we were working on, but we knew the structure, and then we could put it together, and then our Zoom meetings, I think, became much more productive because we could look over each other's units, and we sort of all were on the same page, literally and figuratively. So I think that was
Yeah.
the key
Yeah.
of how we did it.
Yeah, I would make that suggestion to anyone who's thinking about creating a textbook is that decide on that template for each unit. What are the components and keep them, if you can, keep them the same or relatively the same for each unit, because then it's like a business. Then you're able to scale that business for each unit. You're building one Uniqlo shop and you say, okay, I want to, scale it out. I want to build, 50, 100, 1,000, 10,000 stores. So I think just being able to do that, and then Daniel and I could easily say, all right, the conversation, what's our density? How many lines do we want to do? How many exchanges? All right, let's do it 10 to 12 or something. So that's the content that we want to do. Let's stick to 10 to 12. So that made our meetings much more efficient in saying, okay, we know that's what we want to do. All right, what about the vocabulary that we're using? Have we double checked that? And we looked at the difficulty of the vocabulary that we're using. And I think that went really well. And it was just a question of, all right, the only thing for us was that alternating the language use, where you're going to talk about using the language in that unit versus critical thinking, because we wanted to make the critical thinking component part of the book series, but we use it every other unit. So that was it.
Right. So you have this basic outline, a basic structure, a template, and then
Yeah.
you maybe didn't know the exact content, but you
Right.
had a framework to work.
Well, yeah, we had like we winnowed down. Like I knew based on teaching in the past that I wanted to include this, this, and this. And Daniel said I want to do, financial independence. I said, sure, okay. So we knew, okay, let's just brainstorm. Let's come up with 20. All right, we've got 20. All right, let's winnow it down. What do we want to? Okay, let's get down to 15, 12. All right, there's 2 books. We only have 12. What do we want to do? That's going to go in book 2. It's more difficult. That's going to go in book 1. So that was our process initially. As far as what's a typical day like, I think, at that time, I think
Yeah.
talk to the ex-Marine. He's very good at making structures. So I think Daniel, I kind of followed along with his process, and he asked me, what do you normally do? And we just set goals for each week, and then we shared a document, I think, Daniel, on Google. We had a Google form going back and forth, and I created a calendar, and I think we said, all right, this is this week's goals. Let's try to do this. Let's talk about it on Saturday, see where we're doing. And, sometimes they were like, oh, I got really busy doing this. I'm a little behind. Well, do you think you can make it up? Are we realistic for next week? All right, let's see if we can make it up. And generally, we just stayed with those weekly goals. And we knew we started at the end and said, obviously, the book has to be done. It's going to go to the printer on this date. So let's work backwards and just see where we're going to end up. So we just made a weekly schedule.
Yeah.
And
I think you made that weekly schedule,
did.
and it was good because,
it kept us on task. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things like I think, what is it, Covey talks about sharpening the saw, or you mentioned the sort of urgent but not what do they say, like all these different tasks, and it's one of those tasks that's easy to put off because it's not an emergency in the moment, right? Like my faculty meeting and everything is sort of urgent, so I could say, oh, I'll do it next day, but because we had that schedule, and then of course because it was COVID, I think we did have more time at home and to do things.
Yeah, it was a great way to be productive.
Okay, there's one question in the chat. I want to get to that if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
From Timothy. He says, one thing I noticed is that some textbooks have Japanese translations for certain parts of the text. Is this something you guys have considered as a form of scaffolding? It's a great question.
Yeah, so first of all, what we decided with this textbook is that we didn't want to just market it to the Japanese audience. So I think we wanted to avoid, so throughout the textbook, we use different currencies, we use different countries, we use people from, even though the main character is Japanese, there's sort of a Western name mentor, and then the other guy's from Brazil, so I think her mentor is from California, is it? Yeah, she's from California, and then the mentor is from Sao Paulo. So we probably didn't want to put a Japanese translation in anything with the text because it would kind of narrow down our market, which was already a little bit narrow. At the same time, I do think using students' first language can be a great scaffold. And both of us, I think, do sometimes use Japanese in the classroom. To scaffold the material, but we didn't include it in the text. And also maybe another reason not to include in the text is I've noticed, at least at my university, they still sort of break textbooks and classes between the native speaker and the Japanese speaker classes. And very often, if you get a textbook that has Japanese translation, it will only be used by the Japanese faculty because you might have a non-Japanese faculty member that can't speak Japanese or not well enough to use it, and then they can't use it. So I think for us, it was more of a marketing decision but maybe Steve can expand on
No,
that.
I agree entirely. That was something that we decided we want to sell the book globally. And also we made the Quizlet cards, those flashcards. There's a version, there's two versions. There's one that's English, and there's another one that's English, Japanese. So if they just download Quizlet and they get the link from us, they could easily study the flashcards that it shows them meeting in Japanese. So
Okay, well,
they have that available. Also, John, one thing, nowadays they just take their phone and they just hover over the text and it would translate for them automatically.
Yeah.
That's what I'm like. I give
some
a hand.
students are constantly doing
Yeah,
that.
I give a handout in class. I'm like, all right, this, and I've, I've graded it down to Sepher, the right level for them for my seminar. And
Right.
two girls
Yeah.
just pull out their phone and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. The Japanese is on the back, actually. Just do the English first. So nowadays they could do
Timothy has a good point in his sexual follow-up comment. If there are books that do have Japanese and English, the international students that are in his class
I got it.
learn English and they learn Japanese at the same time. So that is
We had talked about, Daniel and I, that doing the book in Japanese
right.
entirely. So
Right.
it's actually something that we talked about, like,
Mhm.
we feel the book would actually do well just in Japanese.
Just as a business book.
Just as a business book. So it's something we are considering. But then I guess you could do it bilingually. You could do it in English, but maybe you should be doing it in multiple languages.
That sounds like a good business venture. Yeah, you could become
Yeah.
bestsellers in
In different languages.
how to get hold of your finances.
Maybe. But Timothy, that's a great question. I think it's a really good point that, yeah, it would be helpful for the students who are studying Japanese. That would actually be helpful for them. I agree. But
as
they could
Steve
use the
said-
flashcards. They could use the flashcards, and it's like, there's the English, there's the Japanese. Because I know for
Yeah.
me, making the flashcards and then running them by somebody, I thought, oh, this is a good review. Oh, I didn't know that word in Japanese. Okay, so I learned some Japanese along the way doing the flashcards. So it's okay.
Yeah, and with technology, I think this is becoming easier and easier for both the students and the teachers to offer this, right?
Yeah.
So you could run, a unit through ChatGTP, get a translation, either you check it or someone else. So you could do that very easily with some of the activities now yourself.
Right. You can just project that on the screen
Mhm.
and use that. Let's move on a little bit because we're running a little bit out of time. So I'm going to skip down to
Go right ahead.
challenges or frustrations in this project while you were making it. So what sort of challenges did you encounter while you were writing this book? Or was it always piece of cake
Do you-
every day?
No,
was
I
No,
think-
I know it's a lot of work. It's a labor
Yeah.
of love. It's a lot of work, and it doesn't go away. It's like you have to get it done, and there's more to do, and there's deadline. A lot of deadlines. I can't frustrations. I just think you're trying to just get everything done. Like the number of rewrites, working with our layout person. He's great, but he's busy as well doing other work, and we just want everything to get done. And it's like writing a thesis. If you've been through a thesis, there's all these rewrites, right? So just going through all the small little errors and making sure things are fixed, so the layout's just a little bit off. I guess that's a little bit frustrating, but it's part of the process. That's all.
Yeah, I think it was frustrating. Maybe the layout was a big one.
Yeah.
And again, because it was COVID, I think with two people writing the book, it's a little bit more difficult to coordinate everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think there was some confusion at one point where we both did the same unit or something like that. And then we were like, well, I thought you said so it's a little harder to coordinate like that, but I think that was pretty much it. But in general, I think especially our first book took us a year, which maybe I think is one of the questions to write. The second book only took 6 months because we had got the process down. And now, especially with some technology help, we're thinking of a couple of different we're going to do a personal finance book, Think Big for Personal Finance. And I think Steve was thinking about Think Big for Critical Thinking, using the same format and using some technology to kind of do the formatting very easily. I don't think it will take 6 months this time,
No.
So
It shouldn't, not with technology. And
Yeah.
that we have the experience. I think we'd be able to do it. Just you have to create the schedule. I think it's like anything. You're adding how many hours to your weekly schedule, and you have to basically be held accountable and figure out when you're going to put in that time.
Yeah. Do you think you
Yeah.
could have written this if COVID didn't happen, or what you were at home, right? And say, "Oh, I
Yeah.
have this time and I have this idea. Now is a great chance to write the book," or
You know what? I feel that I was pretty driven to do this textbook for a long time. And I just felt that I've used so many business textbooks out there, and it's like anybody, like most textbooks, it doesn't fulfill all your needs. Oh, I wish I could change this. I wish I could change that. But I just felt strongly that I wanted to produce a textbook that would empower students and give them skills for the future. So I was pretty driven towards that, and I was glad I met Daniel and I got to know him. And I thought I was going to do this book on my own, but then I wanted somebody to bounce ideas off of and kind of push me to get it done, you know. And then I met Daniel, and he was really driven and serious about investing and real estate. And then we started working together on some real estate projects and investing together. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to ask this guy if he wants to work with me.
okay, fantastic.
So I think that's what happened. And he was like, sure. And then I asked, I'm like, how are you going to fit this into your schedule? You're always publishing papers. You're doing this investing thing. He's like, I'll make it work. I said, okay. And I think he was probably a little surprised at the schedule and then the time it took, but
Yeah, it was tough. Fitting everything in. I thought it would be easier, but it was tough. But it just depends on your schedule, and you can do it slowly over time.
yeah,
So
it just
Yeah,
depends
but
when you want to get it done.
you do need deadlines.
yeah,
If you don't have that, it'll just turn into a decades-long process.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
have to. I think you have to decide, like, okay, in our cycle, let's say, John, we're supposed to have books ready by JALT National, right? Let's say October, November, your book has to be ready to be presented if you want people to adopt your book for the following year. So you know that, okay, that's my schedule. It's October or November. When am I gonna? I have to get layout done by a certain time. It's probably best, like I said earlier, to work backwards and say, how long is my layout going back and forth? Oh, it's not going to take 1 week. It's going to take 3 weeks or 1 month probably to get that done. So you have to work backwards and say, all right, is this possible? If not, that's okay. Then I'll get it done for the following year. So that's probably
Okay, we've got a couple
Yeah, go ahead.
comments in the chat. One is about the price of the book. Is it 2,500?
yeah.
with
Kind
tax.
of an
Yeah,
odd price. 2,585, is that correct?
But I think that's with tax. I think,
Yeah, with
Oh,
tax
I
it's
think it-
2,350.
Okay,
It's
I
with
see.
tax is 2,500.
yeah,
with-
without tax, 2,350 or. I think
Yeah.
we tried to price it a little bit lower than books that were out there, but there's 2 books, so I wanted to make it somewhat affordable for my students, and that's why we came up with that price.
Yeah.
Okay, Stephen Bridge has a question. It says, you mentioned the focus on personal and corporate finance in Think Big for Business.
Mhm.
Are there sections in the units that feature principles of global businesses, or is Think Big for Global Business in the pipeline?
Oh,
Maybe. I think we have it, as we said, we were really trying to market it globally.
yeah.
We didn't want to go to Japan. So, I mean, from the first unit actually deals with the different markets.
Yeah,
And it goes with that video of the countries to start businesses in. So I think we start and go through it a global mindset throughout the whole book.
Yeah, right from the get-go, the first unit, that QR code, it takes them to what are future population projections over the next 20 years? How many consumers will there be in each country? So they have to look at future projections of who will have the world's most consumers. And
Yeah.
students are thinking, I was like, well, these are the markets you're going to have to sell to. So I think,
are they getting depressed living in Japan because the population?
well, I want them to be
dropping?
realistic about that. Let's face it, adult diapers started outselling baby diapers
Yeah.
years
That's the
ago.
market you want to be in, yes.
But I'm just
Yeah.
saying that, only focusing on Japan means you're selling to a shrinking market. So
Right.
how are you going to sell? This is what I'm trying to tell them is like, you have to think globally, and you're going to need these skills to succeed. So I think it kind of hits them over the head by looking at those numbers. And they were like, hey, you know, they were surprised and like, hey.
I think it's probably even more surprising to your students, at least from what you've told me, Steve. Like my students are already getting that mindset from every one of their econ classes that you have to think globally. You know, the Rakuten model. Mikitani is talking about, you know, learning English and going all this. So they already understand that. And many of them are thinking that way. But it's
Can we get to I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, and also another thing, selfishly in my case, you know, I'm the director of the English faculty in the management faculty. I'm a director of the English Studies program, so I'm supposed to be promoting the TOEIC. So I also want them to register and take the TOEIC test. So I want them to do that, not only take my class, but also study for the TOEIC.
Right.
So that'll help them. Go ahead, John, you were going to say.
Back to kind of the business side of publishing textbooks in Japan. Who is your publisher and how did you find them?
Okay, so you're supposed to ask that. So
he's so good looking, this guy that we have as the publisher.
Handsome.
Yeah,
so handsome.
Must be a filter. So when I first had an idea to make an English communication textbook for freshman English I started piloting materials back in about 2012 or 13. And then I had the idea that I had my students create their own communication tests based on their own conversations for a number of years. And then I looked at, okay, I said, you know, what kind of English do you want to use in the future? That's what I'd like you to create. So I compilated all this material, and then I said, I should really make a textbook out of this. And that went on for about 8 or 10 years. And then I created my first textbook, A Single Step to English Communication, 2015. And then before I was going to do that, you know, I approached some large publishers, and they don't want that content because it would sabotage or, you know, take away the sales from their other best-selling books, and they're not going to pay you much of a commission. And then I fortunately had a few friends that were publishing their own books, and I talked to them, and they kind of guided me along and gave me an ISBN number and hooked me up with the printer, and talked to me about layout and what I can do it myself or pay somebody. So I learned a lot just through those two friends. And that's when I started Akebono Press, just to do my one textbook. And then Daniel and I did Think Big for Business, second textbook. I've got another person interested in doing a book. So that's just kind of developed over time. And it's like any business or anything you start, there's a learning curve, and you just learn, you know, how to utilize your time properly. And obviously, maybe
so you had a couple of people help you figure out how to get the ISBN.
Yeah, and a big plug to my friend John Sperry at Global Stories Press. So thank you, John, for guiding me along. John's been doing his own materials for 20 years probably. And
yeah, we've got a couple of his books on the showcase.
Yeah, John's a great guy, and he and I are friends, and he really helped me out when I was thinking about doing that. So yeah, that's how it worked out for me.
Fantastic. And so you print from is it a Korean publisher or a Chinese publisher? Or Japanese?
So they all started.
Printer,
he and other people started using the Korean publisher, and I went through a Japanese publisher at first when I first did my book. I just went through a Japanese local publisher just to do you know, a small run, just to pilot the materials before, you know, I was even considering doing a book, you know, black and white version, and just, will this work, and throw this out, adopt this. So then just looking at the prices, that going through the Korean publisher was just, when you do a larger print run, it just was much cheaper.
Yeah. So what would you say would be like a minimum print run when you talk to the Korean printer or any printer?
Yeah, 500, 1,000. Yeah, 500 or 500 for sure. More like 1,000. And Daniel and I printed a lot of books, just because as anybody who gets a quote, you'll see that the price is just so much cheaper when you do 1,000 books versus 200 books. They have to set up the whole press, so that initial cost to do that is very expensive. So
okay, but you also work with a distributor as well. There's a lot of different you know, components in this whole process. There's the writers, you guys, and then you've got like layout, and then you've got printers, and then you've got publishers, and then you've
Right.
got distributors and
Right.
booksellers and students and teachers. So
It all
how do you
depends
do
on
the
your schedule.
distribution?
Well, it's how do I feel about it?
No, how do you distribute your books?
Okay, I go through English Books Japan. It was a large book distributor in Japan, and they used to have a paper catalog, which was quite helpful that got, you know, handed out to teachers, but now they only have an online catalog. So they store, once I get the books printed, I send them to their warehouse in Kyushu, and they store the books, and then they deal directly with the schools, universities that contact them, or anybody who wants to order books. So in that regard, I don't have to do that. I did that when I first started. I was trying to distribute and do all that, but trying to do that the first week of April when you're in charge of an English program at a university and you're on committees and you're doing this other stuff, for me, it was a bit too much, or as my wife told me, too much on your plate. And I said, yep, too much on my plate. You're absolutely right. So it's helpful for that. Let's say if I retire from teaching, I might consider just, distributing the books myself and okay, maybe I'll just do that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of independent authors and independent publishers go through English books because they know all the schools and they know the system very well.
Yeah, it's very good. And I mean, in sending out inspection copies, they're very good where, people are interested and they'll send it out for me. I've done it myself, but it's pretty helpful. I just send an email and they're very good with that. So
okay, there's a question in the chat about English books. Japan, does it have a better reach than a traditional publishing house like Oxford or Cambridge or one of those?
No, I think Oxford or Cambridge has a better reach, better marketing, but as a new author with Oxford or Cambridge, I don't know what your commission would be. I'm guessing 5%. So you're not going to make, that's my guess, but you're not going to make very much money.
Yeah, or they'll just pay you a flat fee.
Yeah, I just think with English Books Japan, they take a pretty good sized commission, but you have to decide whether it's worth it or not. I mean, if someone's just starting out and you have a small reach, you could just sell the books yourself, or maybe contact or make some type of arrangements with a university bookstore and do it yourself.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add, that's something we're playing with here, is that I've noticed, at least at my university, we have some in-house publishing that we use for sort of our textbooks, and the students have switched over. We give them an option between the printed textbook and the digital one, and almost all of my students are using the digital one now. So, we're sort of wondering in the future with our different editions that we're doing, whether we want to go the digital route as well, which would make it so that we could maybe cut out a couple of steps in there. But we're still
you wouldn't
kind
have
of
to
playing
pay
with
for
it.
printing, which is probably one of the most expensive, costs you have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. Yes, absolutely. So it's something that, we'd like to pursue that, and we've talked about it. So it's on my agenda.
Do you feel like students learn as well using on a screen? Because they're always on the screen anyway. And for me, I just find it much better for the learning process for them to have a pencil and paper or something to write down.
No, I totally 100% believe that. Also,
well, I kind of use a hybrid approach. I was just going to say, like, for our text, the students have the digital textbook, but they also have a notebook. And they tend to do the exercises on their notebook because I collect the notebook at certain periods. So you could kind of do both, but I agree.
Watching my students use Think Big, and there's a section in Daniel, I think you made that one too, that where they have to evaluate whether they're going to invest in the chicken.
That's one of my favorite. The chicken shop.
The chicken shop, the chicken restaurant shop. And you could just see they're adding they're figuring out, writing down the numbers, and then they have to compare to their partners, see if your numbers are the same. What did you guys come up with? Then I make them write it on the board, so they're writing it again. All right, so what's our decision? Are we going to invest in the chicken business? The brother-in-law's chicken business, right? and they have to decide. So I think pen to paper for me
Yeah.
wins out. Yeah, I just feel it's really advantageous. Yeah.
But I think the thing that we've learned during this process, we had sort of some issue, of course, that we started putting it out during COVID, meaning we couldn't get to sort of the conferences to put out our book.
Mm,
And then just as we've done it, we've seen that mainly our book is being adopted for workshops rather than the main classes, which from a business perspective is probably not the best thing because you're not getting the numbers that you would get if it was being used as a first or second year general English course.
yeah,
So all these sort of factors are kind of we're learning as we go.
yeah.
Um,
But more orders have come in for,
yeah,
so
they're
we're
starting to
we're
come in
excited
more.
about that. Yes,
And
Okay.
that's a couple of years later after publishing it, right?
Yeah,
that's
well, I
true.
guess probably some of it is word of mouth.
Yeah,
People use the book or they hear the book and they tell other people. And
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I think that
one
has a
more
lot to
thing
do
I
with it.
wanted to add just as an intro because I thought it might be interesting if somebody's looking to write. I think in the past the big thing was it was great, especially big publishing houses wanted to publish people that could guarantee that my university is going to use a certain number of books.
sure.
But I've noticed in the last 5 years or whatever, there's been a from faculty and also from administration this sort of turn where they don't want teachers using their own books because they see it as them sort of profiting from this, and so that's one thing that's sort of I think has changed because you can't at my university it's a little bit like that, and that's why we're not using it as the main textbook. They don't really like
So are
teachers
you
to
prohibited from using your own books?
uh, they not really. They've allowed me to put it on as an option for workshop classes, which I don't teach. So it sort of depends on the university. Other universities, I think
It's
Steve's
kind of a
able to
it's
use
kind of
it.
a shame though. I mean, if you've written a
Hmm.
book and you know the book and it fits the students and it's a legitimate book that other people are using at different universities, I don't see. I mean, I can
Well,
understand the conflict of interest, but
mhm.
on the other hand, it's a terrible shame for you to be not able to use your book.
Yeah, I think so too. And we had another teacher that wanted to make a version for his faculty, but in the end decided not to make the version because he found out that they wouldn't allow him to use his own book.
How about
So
a pen name?
yeah, so that has been something we've thought about.
Why
But I
don't you
mean,
tell
these
us
are
about that, John?
I wanted to bring that up a little bit because, it is a big situation for material developers because we're not just doing this only for fun, right? We're trying to make a profit from it, and these are considerations that we have to think about. And maybe it would have been, even though I think we're happy to do the book and we want to continue with different editions, these are things maybe it would have been great if we had thought about beforehand or found out about.
Well, I
Um,
Yeah,
guess you learned through experience.
yeah, we
yeah,
didn't know that. I mean, we had planned that Daniel would be able to use the book at his university, and then, after we finished, he came back and said that. I said, oh, okay. I mean, I'm fortunate in my uh, university that I'm allowed to use my book. And one of the reasons I decided to publish my own book with my name, I saw that some of my Japanese colleagues, had published books, their names they were using in class. And I said, well, if they can do that, why can't I?
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes they might have like a vetting committee just to make sure that
Mhm.
it's
yeah,
it's legitimate, and I think that that's fair enough.
yeah.
Have a vetting committee out, without any interest in the
Uh,
book to,
but
rubber stamp or stamp the book, say
yeah, but
it's
but
great.
it's
You know,
also one of the reasons I've always made my textbooks a little bit less money than the books is that I don't want anyone to say that and I was ever price gouging. It's like, no, look, I, it's cheaper price than other books that are out there and the content is
right.
better. So
Okay, let's end with one last question is
yeah.
what advice would you give to new material writers? Don't give up or um don't even get started.
No, I can't say that at all. I think it's a great accomplishment if you want to do it. Just set up a task sheet that you feel is attainable goals. I'm big on attainable goals. It's like set some goals for yourself and make sure that something that will fit with your schedule. And again, like John, you were alluding to, you have to set dates for yourself. Be honest and say, all right, my goal is to finish this in, 6 months or 1 year or 2 years or 5 years, whatever it may be. Set a time and say, that's when I'm going to finish it. And also, I was fortunate, I mentioned before, I had my friend John Sperry. If you could find a mentor, find somebody who's written a book. Daniel and I are big on finding mentors in finance and real estate. We may know a bit about, I'd say quite a bit about investing, but what about find somebody that knows more than you, that has done more deals? It's like, okay, what have they learned? What do they know more about investing or tax? What can I learn from them? Well, textbook writing similar was like, all right, that person wrote a book. Ask them that question. Here's the question I'd ask. If someone wrote a book, what advice would you give yourself now if you could start the book all over again?
Right.
Right.
Great.
And I think if somebody asked me that, I would say that piloting
Yeah.
the book is really key for both the content, but then also from the business aspect. I think Tim Ferriss wrote a lot about this in the 4 Hour Work Week with rather than launching, finishing a whole product and launching it, being able to test it out and see if it's a viable product first before you commit to the whole thing is great. So both from developing the material, making the material good, but also from a business aspect, I think piloting. And that was something that was a little difficult for us because it was during COVID. But
Yeah.
I think that's what we were going to do as we move forward.
Yeah, I think piloting, we had a couple semesters to work with book one, so I felt comfortable, and you have to be prepared, in your mind, that activity goes real smoothly, but then try to apply it to another class. Like, here's this information gap, and then you apply it to another class. You're like, whoa, way too complicated. To get them into the activity just took too much time, and you just follow the keep it simple, stupid principle, right? Where you're like, no, make it easy. Instructions have to be easy. And I think that's something I've learned from doing textbooks is that make your instructions quite easy. Go back, look at it again, say, how could I rewrite that that's even easier for it's a second language learner, so they could read those instructions and know exactly what they're doing in this activity.
Right.
Yeah.
And get second eyes on it.
Yeah, that's
because
key. Yeah,
because you don't want, it's
key.
your baby.
Yeah.
You don't want to be, judging
Well,
it. You need somebody
well,
else to look.
Just on that, if someone else sees that and they've got criticisms about it, or they don't like it, or they don't understand it, how do you take that? Or
Not well. No.
I usually
I mean,
I don't talk to them
there is a story
again.
with,
I don't.
we did have somebody that was quite critical of the fact that we as men, for example, were kind of going with this feminist angle, and maybe we weren't doing enough in the textbook. And I think it upset me a little bit because, but it is viable criticism, right? And so you have to learn to take this. But after you've been working for a year and a half on something, and then somebody says something like that, it was really like upsetting. But then, when you really think about it, you're like, well, yeah, this is a good criticism. Somebody else might have it. Let's try to figure out how to make it better in the future.
right.
But there's things like that. But I think that it's really hard to be objective.
John, you have to have kind of a thick skin to do this. You have to put out a book or to put out a YouTube video. People are always going to criticize you. They're just
Right, because it's out there.
It's out there.
You're vulnerable.
And there's all kinds of people out there who don't have time to write a book, so then they're critical of anything new, or it's not in line with their teaching philosophy. It's always, people are always going to be critical. So you kind of got to shake it off and say, no, I believe in the material I wrote. I've piloted it. I've seen it be successful. I believe in it, so I'm good.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is you have to separate out what's criticism that maybe is good, that you could fix something, or maybe, everybody's got their own thing. You can't change for everybody, right? So, you have to have a core set of principles of what you're trying to create, but then also see what you can work with, you know?
And
Right, and I'm sure some teachers that will see the book, it's going to resonate with them, and it'll resonate with their students. And
Yeah.
with some other teachers, it's not going to appeal to them. But that's probably true for any textbook.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's absolutely true. I think having reviewers really helps. I mean,
Mhm.
for me, it was getting 3 to 5 people that I know that will look over the book and that I know also will not just say, "Oh, it's great," there's not much you need to change.
Mhm.
I want people who are going to be critical, and I want them that they've done it before, who you know, 2 of them have written books, so that
Right.
I remember 2 or 3 of them had written books. So I was like, "You've done books, so what would you do to change it?" And one guy said, I don't really have a business background. I said, "That's okay. It's fine. Tell me what you don't understand and what would be
Yeah.
difficult for you to teach." Because then I knew it had to be in the teacher's manual. Like, this guy, he didn't understand this unit or how to teach it. Okay, we better explain how to teach this unit clearly.
Right. Okay. And
So that
if
helped me a lot.
if teachers have questions, or if they want to, look at the website or buy the book or contact you for the teacher's manual or quizzes or whatever, how can they reach you guys?
I think through those emails that we have in the last part of the slides,
They can also go to the homepage, Akebono Press.
yeah.
They can go to www.akebono.press, and there's a contact button on there. They could just you can request an inspection copy right on the website, or just directly contact me by email, either myself or Daniel's email address that
Yeah.
he put
Okay,
up before.
I'll put those in the YouTube video so people can see those.
Thank you.
And
We appreciate
Yeah.
it.
links to that. All right, guys, any last words?
Daniel?
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. This was a lot of fun. I actually
Yeah.
could go longer.
I think we could go another couple hours, but
Yeah.
But
we
I
gotta
think,
cut
no,
it down here. Yeah.
my last words would be, again, if you have a great idea, believe in yourself, bounce the idea off other people. That's
Mhm.
the best thing you could do, and find somebody who's written a book or two and ask them to kind of, give you some advice. I think that would be the
Mhm.
best idea. And then, just create a graph, kind of charts for yourself. Who am I going to go for layout? Who am I going to use for printer? I need reviewers. Find yourself some good reviewers. That will really help you out.
And decide on the structure
Yeah.
as quickly as you can, because that will give you the direction
Yeah.
to actually create,
Yeah, and also know your competition. I mean, I know you have a good idea, but look at your competition and say, what am I doing differently? What am I doing better? And that's really a question you need to ask yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate you coming
Pleasure.
out and supporting
Thank
the
you.
Material Writer SIG.
Thank you.
And we got a lot of
you.
thanks from the audience members
Thank
there.
you, Steve, for joining us. Thank you, Brett.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you,
Tim.
Timothy. I know you guys were active in the chat, so thank you for all that. I saw that, and I read your comments, so I appreciate you attending. Thank you.